What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. A couple of days ago I released a video on the channel specifically detailing what I consider to be the best in slot reactors per Descendant, and in that video I had mentioned that what I wasn't going to discuss was SUBSTATS, since that was a much broader topic and obviously much beyond the scope of that particular video. However, I did pose it to the audience that if this was something that you guys would be interested in seeing, that I would definitely put that together. There was some comments asking that this would be something interesting to look at, so this video today is going to tackle that exact topic. Now, first things first, I have to get some detail out of the way, and this is going to be a slightly longer and maybe more complicated video than I usually do, but I'm also gonna in certain cases speak in generalities, because the main point here is that SUBSTATS as a topic can be as complicated as you want to make it, especially if you're considering min-maxing your character and making it the best possible version that it can be. But nonetheless, a fairly standard understanding of it is possible for anybody, and this can actually elevate your build for whichever Descendant you're playing if you correctly pick the right SUBSTATS. So there's going to be a couple of things we're going to get out of the way first from an understanding perspective, and then I'll show you, we're going to go through the Descendants, which SUBSTATS work best for Descendants in which situations, and we'll go through that. Of course, there's going to be timestamps in the video below, or in the video if you want to jump around and stuff like that. But first things first, if we start talking about SUBSTATS, the very first thing that we have to consider is talking about how damage is calculated in this game. And I'm definitely not gonna go into a deep dive here, because I guarantee I will lose you guys within the first 2 minutes of the video. So we're gonna keep it very high level, very helicopter view. But the bottom line is, you have to think of, and this isn't, the First Descendant isn't the only game that works this way. Games of this type, looter shooters, games that build like this way, they all kind of like work with this concept. It's colloquially known as damage buckets, and that's basically how your damage is calculated based on all of the different things like SUBSTATS and your reactor and yada yada yada. So a very simple way how you can get started into this topic and kind of like see all the damage things that are affecting your output on a Descendant is simply just to look at your Descendant here, and then just to press W and go to info. Now this screen has a bunch of information on it, specifically on the left side. So above my head here is all the stats pertaining to the weapon that you currently have in your hand. And then in the middle of this is the important part that we're going to be focusing on, because this basically shows the skill power calculations for your character. And every single boost, every single additive thing, multiplicative thing, any certain, anything that you have additional on your character that's coming from mods, coming from a reactor, everything is going to be shown here. Now, most recently, they've actually refined the screen a little bit and to combine some of these together, which was good. But nonetheless, it still sometimes reads a little bit difficult. But the bottom line is, each one of these multipliers is affecting your damage output. And you can see which ones you have stacked high, which ones you have stacked low. Now, two important things that I want to cover, and then I'm going to stop talking about damage buckets, is the first thing is that the meta right now in the game, and especially how your damage is calculated, it is in your best interest to actually stack as many different buckets as you possibly can. Basically putting all of your mods, all of your additionals that you're getting from reactors, from mods on your character, everything like that, into one bucket actually means that you lose out on the fact of how damage is calculated, and that you could potentially, by stacking multiple buckets, get actually more damage out of it. So what I'm saying to you is that it's not always the case of, like, for example, we're looking at Freyna here now. It's not always the case that you would just want to be stacking toxic. You also, for example, want to be stacking tech, because that is part of the multiplier as well, and that is an additional damage bucket for you. Now, I have a little sheet here, basically just kind of like showing this, and I do apologize for the fucking flashbang, but this is Excel and it's white. But basically, just on a high level, you can think of your damage buckets being categorized into three different types, three different streams. Your first damage bucket is your reactor. So that is your reactor SP, which is on your reactor here. You can see you have on your reactor, you have some skill power, and this is of course affected by whether you have the correct weapon equipped, because then you go from 100 to 140% and everything like that. So that's the beginning of the calculation. Your second bucket is actually a group of smaller buckets. but it's your straight SP boost. So for example, if you have something like power increase, the mod equipped, that is a straight skill power boost. So it's a generic one, if you want to call it that. It's not flavored to a damage type, it's not flavored to an elemental. And then secondly, another sub bucket that you have within the buckets, the 2 buckets, is the elemental. So think like toxic, chill, you know, like that. And then the third one, as you guessed it, is your damage type. So like dimension, fusion, tech, you know, something like that. And then we have a third bucket, which is your skill power modifier, because there's also a difference in that. See, you have skill power boost, right? But you also have skill power modifier. That is an additional bucket as well. So all of these things, this can get very complicated very fast, especially if you are a novice in this and basically you haven't fucked around with this before. But the bottom line is you have to understand that it is in your best interest to actually stack in each of these categories, because in that way you are affecting a more powerful combination of damage at the end. And again, purists now and people that you know have messed with this further on and min-maxes and so on will maybe have a problem with how oversimplified I'm explaining this now, and I do apologize for that. But at the same time, I don't want this to turn into a fucking science lecture or something like that. So the bottom line is just this: the TLDR that you want to walk away from here is you have to understand that your damage doesn't just come from one source, it comes from multiple sources, and it's in your own best interest to figure out a way that you can build your character that you actually stack multiples of those sources. That is why, like in the case of like my Freyna build here, you can see that we're not just going for toxic and then going, okay, fuck it, we're done, whatever. We're actually stacking into tech as well. We're also stacking into like you know, additional buckets, right? Additional ways. Decimator, for example, is giving us skill power modifier. So there's that other bucket as well. So by doing this, you are effectively creating a very powerful damage stream and you're able to deal far more damage. Okay, so then now that we have that terribly fucking uncomfortable topic out of the way, we can now also start talking about splitting our group of descendants, which are currently in the game, into different categories, because not all descendants have the same base crit chance and the same base, wow, that's terrible, drit damage. Really, this is what we're doing now? Not all of our descendants have the same base crit rate and the same base crit damage. Some have the same, but there's actually a range and different descendants have different ones. So that's why you can know certain descendants are okay for you to build into a crit based build, and certain descendants are not okay because their base value starts so low that it is inefficient to actually build them into crit, because you far better can get, you know, you can build them far better by actually just focusing into raw power. In other words, just increasing their skill power in all of the different buckets instead of fucking with crit. All right. So this is a full table of all of the current descendants that we have, right? With their crit rates and their crit damages. And these are the base values. This is before you start adding reactors to them and mods and all that stuff, right? So right off the bat, we can see that certain descendants are perfectly suited for the crit life. And although, again, guys, remember, this is not some absolute shit. You could choose to build your descendant however you want. You do you, boo. Like, you do what you gotta do. But if we're talking meta and if we're talking like best in slot and stuff like that, then unfortunately there are some fucking rules and there are some things which will just make your character better. So if you are interested in building a crit build, there are some descendants who are going to be really, really good at that. Okay, Blair, because he starts super high crit and actually has a way of increasing his crit even more with his skills. Lepix starts decently high as well, but Lepix overkill heals hits multiple times, and it's essentially a skill that sits and burns and pings the whole time. So even if you have a slightly lower crit, the point is you're getting multiple hits, so the crit's still good. Luna has similarly, and again, this is guys, this is DPS Luna, so if you're building AoE Luna, she also stacks well into crit. Sharon is very, very high in crit, I mean comparable to Blair. And the thing is, we now know that we are getting a very specific Transcendent mod for the Ultimate Sharon in Season 2, which will be focused on crit builds, which makes complete sense. I think this is probably going to be fucking insane, by the way, because basically what they said in the dev talk is like how this is going to work is that the build, the more you crit, the more the skill will be available to use, because critting will lower the cooldown of the skill. So the point is you're going to be stacking crit to a threshold, and then you'll basically have this, you know, AoE skill that you can use off cooldown the entire time, which is probably going to make her fucking insane. I have my suspicions. And then last but not least, we also have Viesa, who also has a fairly high at 15%. So in my opinion, the only descendants that you should consider building crit builds of is Blair, Lepic, Luna, Sharon, and Viesa. Again, you want to build a fucking crit Freyna, have at it. All right, then that means then on the other side of the coin, they are descendants who are perfectly suited for not building them crit at all, but rather just focusing on the damage buckets and getting as many different damage buckets online. So like, for example, Ajax, you're going to want to go non-dimension, you're going to go tech and all of that, because you want to get as many of those buckets online, you know, skill, power, modifier, blah, 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 all that, and you're just going to ignore crit completely. The same is true for Bunny, Enzo, Izamo, Freyna, Glade, Jaber, Kyle, Valby, and Eugen. Okay, so that leaves one descendant who we haven't talked about yet, and that's Haley. Now, Haley is an absolute to the rule here, and that's because Haley actually has a very, very low base crit where she starts, but she has a skill that can essentially boost her crit almost to max if you do stack it a little bit. So if you stack some crit mods in and you have crit on your reactor or something like that, then you're actually able to almost fully max out her crit, and that's why she's kind of like a anomaly. She's an absolute to the rule here. So even though she has a very low base start, she's still really good, and you should absolutely build her into crit. And why is all of this shit important? Well, because this will affect your choices in terms of substats for your reactor. Because, like, for example, if you are building Ajax, then you know that you're not going to build Ajax into a crit descendant, and so therefore crit rolls on crit substats on your reactor means very little for you and actually slips down in terms of value for you, because those would be not dead rolls, but you wouldn't get as much value from them as you would get from like a raw power substat. Then if we go over here, right, now we're going to be talking about the possible rolls that you can get on reactors, because we also need to understand that. So I've tried to just color code them and turn them, you know, basically what you can get. So we have one specifically just for bossing, and that is skill attack bonus versus Colossus. All right. And that I've assigned a value of 1, because if you want to, and 1 is the best obviously, and 4 is like fucking ass, or not ass, but not as good. And so the point is, if you want to build a reactor and you want to use this reactor to do void intercept bosses, then this is a very important substat for you to have. Okay, then we have skill mod substats. So these are like skill range, skill duration, and skill cooldown. There's one more here that you'll notice is missing, and that's skill cost, but I'll talk about that just now. So these ones are also, their value is 3. They're important, but only if they somehow affect the efficiency of your build. Sometimes you struggle to hit the range cap, for example, if you don't have the right mods, or if you have a shitty mod configuration on your descendant, and then a range roll on your reactor could, for instance, solve that problem for you and help you hit the range cap. Likewise, duration and cooldown. I would say cooldown is probably more important than range and duration. Skill cooldown is one of the more important ones, especially if you have a descendant which has a very high cooldown on like his 4th ability. Viesa comes to mind, Freyna comes to mind. Then skill cooldown can sometimes be a big thing for you as well on your reactor. Next, we have the 2 crit substats that can roll. You can get crit rate and you can get crit damage. And you'll notice that I rated crit damage as a 1, which is super important, just as important as damage versus Colossus. And that's because if you're building a crit damage build, if you're building a crit build, then this is one of the best damage stats for you, if not the best. All right, regardless of anything else, because the point is, this is a decent amount of critical damage that you can get from one source. Why do I rate crit rate so low? Because the actual multiplier, the actual percentage that we get on the reactor is not, in my opinion, impactful enough to beat out crit damage, for example. Okay, next we have the elements, right? We have 5 elements in the game. So you have chill boost, electric boost, fire boost, non-attribute boost, and toxic boost. And I've got a stat value of 2 here, and I'll explain this more. The stat values are going to make a bit more sense for you just now when we look at some examples. All right. Then we have the archetypes, which is like you can have like dimension damage, fusion damage, singular damage, and tech damage. That's of course determined by the skill that you use. It comes from one of those 4. And then we have HP heal, which is a very nuanced one, right? And is useful for if you play the heal version of Eugen, because this can empower the heals, and Eugen is a support. Well, Healgen, if you play him as a support character, is affected by this, and this can actually increase the efficiency of your heals, especially when you're healing your teammates and that sort of stuff. And then I've got a shit category here where I don't think these ones are at the moment right now useful at all, in my opinion, and possibly never will be. And I'll explain that. So these 3 here is against specific factions in the game. Most of the time I think that this is fucking useless, because the point is, if you're bossing, you're going for Colossus damage. And if you're playing against the factions, these are usually rank and file enemies or yellow bars. And if you're struggling to kill them, that you have to put a fucking substat on the reactor, then there might be something wrong with your build. Skill cost, in my opinion, is also not that great, because the point is there are enough decent mods that you can put on your character, just on your Descendant, that you can use this role for something else and it's going to mean more for you. I don't value skill cost that much on reactors. And then last but not least, we also have sub attack. So that is your, fucking swing. And this is also, I mean, if we get some Descendant down the line that's going to have sub attacks be their primary form of damage, or like a great way for them to dump damage, then this might be a decent substat, but nothing like that exists right now, or at least nothing like that exists right now that's fucking great. I mean, Ajax has something that you can empower his, but it's poopy. So, yeah. So ignore these. If you get this on a reactor, I'm sorry, it's a fucking, that reactor is a dud. So then we can move on to some examples, right? So I tried to just categorize some examples here of what I would consider best in slot, and of course you can play off this and compare the reactors that you have and so on. You might have half a fucking god roll reactor, or whatever. And again, your opinion might differ here, and this is where it becomes important that we understand one thing. You could be building your reactor to get the maximum amount of damage out, but that might mean that there's another part of your build that's not that great. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you want to get the maximum amount of damage out of a skill, but that means that you basically then take 2 damage mods, and so you don't use something like skill range. So then that means you have to be more accurate with that skill, but if you are accurate with that skill, then you're going to get the maximum damage. I hope my example makes sense, but that's the point, right? But these are some optimal reactors that can basically min-max your damage. So in the case of you building a reactor for a Descendant that you're primarily going to use to farm Void Intercept bosses, so you're creating a bossing reactor specifically for Colossi, right? And your build is crit focused. Your best in slot role by far is skill attack additional against Colossus and skill crit damage, because you're stacking crit. This is more damage against the Colossus, and then when you crit, that crit damage is obviously also more. This is a very powerful combination for, like, for example, someone like Lepic, and so this I would consider best in slot. Now, if you instead don't have a crit based build and you are actually just focusing on raw power, so think something like Ajax, right? Then you are going to want, and by the way, I mean, you shouldn't build bossing skill Ajax. You should just shoot them with fucking Enduring Legacy, but I'm just making an example. Then in that case, right, still skill attack versus Colossus is important for us here, right? But then we can focus on either one of the elements. So in my Ajax example, that would be non-attribute. So your role would be skill attack versus Colossus and non-attribute skill boost. Or you will go skill attack versus Colossus and one of the archetypes. So for Ajax, that would be tech, right? So it would be tech boost. So I'm talking about this here. So your reactor would be like skill attack versus Colossus and then skill boost from, on tech. So that's for bossing specifically against Colossi. Understand, there's also bossing against yellow bars, but that's not what we're talking about here. Then you wouldn't build Colossus, you just build a fucking mobbing reactor. But the point is this here, this section right here, that covers us for Colossi fights. Now, if you are building mobbing reactors so that you can do 400% infiltrations, fucking special operations, missions, whatever else, pretty much everything except fighting Colossi, then if you are looking for the highest possible damage, right? And so therefore you aren't trying to add any utility to your build, meaning you aren't trying to increase the range of your skills, you aren't trying to increase the duration, you aren't trying to drop your cooldown, then these are the roles that you'll want on a crit focused build. You'll want skill crit damage and an element, or you'll want skill crit damage and an archetype, tech, dimension, whatever, something like that, right? And that's a crit focused build. Again, on the raw power side, let's use fucking Ajax again. On Ajax's side, or actually in this case, let's talk Bunny. So for Bunny, a really good mobbing role is electric boost and singular boost, because that is going to increase your electric damage, which you're dealing with your 3, and it's also going to increase your singular damage, which is also your 3. So you are effective, you are effectively stacking 2 sources of damage. It goes into the same bucket, but again, we're getting super complicated here. But that's a very strong damage, a reactor. But like, for example, and I have to make this example, it's important that you guys understand that there's a lot of nuance here. Because in my Bunny example, let's say, for example, you are struggling to hit the max range, because range is also very important for your 3rd skill. Then it can also be really good for you to have something like electric boost and skill range, because that helps you reach the range cap, which is important. Like high voltage Bunny has a massive range, and so having more range means when you run through the dungeons, you're killing shit before it even sees you, plus you're still getting a damage boost as well. So this is also good. This is more damage, and that's why I say at the top, your highest possible damage. But I don't think there's anything wrong with this role. I think this is a very good role. So if you get 2 fucking gold rolls on an ultimate reactor like this, that shit's money, baby. That is a decent, very decent reactor for Bunny, and you should absolutely hold on to it. The point is, we are talking about literal percentages in efficiency difference here, right? In some cases, the change between this and this can be, something like between 2 to 5% of additional damage, which in the grand scheme of things is fuck all, right? So that's what min-maxing is, right? I mean, you can try and make this as complicated as you want, or you fucking don't. But that's basically the point. And I hope that this kind of gives you idea. So I didn't run through each one of the descendants individually, but what I did is I did create this table, and then you can use the rest of the information and extrapolate that basically what you want to build. If you are building, a crit descendant, then make sure that it's one of these descendants, and then, build your reactors like fucking this if you're going up against void intercept bosses, and like this if you're mobbing, and then you guys get the point. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to make a link at the bottom of this video to this information as well. But I'm also just going to slowly I'm just going to have it there on the screen in case you wanted to screenshot as well and you don't want to fuck around in Excel. So here's this screen with the crit percentages so that you know which descendant you should be using for what. Then here is your reactor roles and my value that I've assigned to them if you want to use that. And then last but not least, here is a section for void intercept bosses, so Colossi, what I consider to be best in slot. And then for our 4th screenshot, here is highest possible damage in a mobbing scenario for a crit focused descendant or just a raw power focused descendant. And that's gonna be it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it was informative. I hope I kind of like scratched the itch that some people had specifically related to this topic. This will be something, of course, that I can build on because we will get more descendants. So this list will increase and we'll have to include them and filter in and see where they fit into this whole thing. So I will keep this updated and I will update you as well. But also, please use this opportunity to ask questions in the comments if I wasn't clear about anything. And also at the same time, I want to say, it's possible that I didn't include some minutia of detail or something like that here, which you might feel, fucking invalidates the whole thing. But I ask you to also consider the fact that I'm trying to make this as, I don't want to use the term generic, but you guys know what I mean. I'm trying to make this as open in terms of information as possible, to not fucking drive off guys like me who sometimes just want to sit and drink a beer and play a game and don't want to be bothered by all the shit, but I still want this to be able to help them. As always, fucking cheers.